The snow had stopped by mid-afternoon, and the whole valley of Wenlock lay white and silent under a low gray sky. Niamh Aldis walked the high road, with her satchel of slates knocking against her hip. She had spent the short day teaching the Fen children their letters, 3 of them this week, crowded around one candle end in one cold room, and her fingers were stiff, and the slates were heavy, and she did not mind. She liked the walk home best of all. She liked the road when there was no one on it but her. Her breath went out ahead of her in small clouds. The crust of the snow held her weight, and then broke every few steps, and her boot sank to the ankle with a sound like tearing cloth. Somewhere down in the black trees along the beck, a single crow spoke once and went quiet. The light was turning a soft blue at the edges of things. She was 2 miles from the village. She was a long way from any great house. She was alone on the hill and glad of it. She was 17 and some months, and she had learned young that the world would let her be quiet if she asked nothing of it. Her father cut wood and pretended there was no debt. Her mother mended other people's linen and pretended she did not cough in the night. Niamh read and taught and pretended nothing at all, which was the hardest of the 3 and the best. She came up over the shoulder of Skelder Hill, where the road ran along the top of the long white slope. Below her, the ground fell away smooth and clean and unbroken to the dark line of the scarp, where the land simply stopped and dropped to the frozen beck far below. One pine grew crooked at the very lip of it. It had stood there as long as the hill. Then a sound came up the slope toward her that belonged to no winter she had known. She turned toward it. A hiss, high and thin, like a blade dragged fast over stone, and beneath it, small and broken, a child's voice. She saw the sled before she understood it. It had come from somewhere up at the crown of Skelder, where the gentry rode out in better weather, and it was on the long slope already, and going wrong. Too fast. Far too fast. A low wooden sled on iron runners, a small hunched shape aboard, and not another soul on all that white hill but her. The sled pointed straight down the fall of the land, straight at the scarp, straight at the place where the ground ended and the air began. There was no deciding in her. Her body simply went. She let the satchel fall, and the slates spilled across the snow, unheard. She ran down the slope. She did not run at the sled. She had walked this hill her whole life and knew the one thing that mattered. A weight on iron runners cannot be caught from behind. It would only leave her standing. So she ran across it instead, cutting down and ahead, flinging herself along the slope so that her line and the sled's line would cross before the edge took it. The crust broke under her boots. She went to one knee and up and on. She did not slow for it. The boy saw her coming. His face turned to her, white, mouth open, eyes stretched wide. He was small, 6 or 7. His hands were locked bone white on the rails of the sled, and he had stopped screaming. He had gone down into the quiet that waits on the far side of screaming. She fixed her eyes on the crooked pine and ran for the space just short of it, the last ground there was. After the pine, there was nothing to run on but the wind. She met the sled 6 feet from the drop. She did not try to halt it. She knew she could not halt it. She threw herself across its path and took the boy instead. One arm hooked hard under both of his, the other hand fisted into the back of his coat, and tore him up and sideways off the runners, away from the lip. The empty sled ran on, over the scarp without a sound. She never heard it strike the bottom. They went down hard and slid, snow and sky and snow again, the white edge rushing up at them. She clamped the boy against her chest with one arm and threw the other hand out, and it closed on the low branch of the crooked pine. The bark bit clean through her palm, her shoulder wrenched, her head struck something under the snow, and the world went white and ringing. And still she held, while her whole weight and the boy's dragged at it, until the two of them came to rest an arm's length from the edge. She could see clean over it, the long gray drop and the black vein of the frozen beck at the foot of it. She held still for one breath. One only. Then she gathered the boy in against her and hauled them both back from the edge, crawling, dragging, digging her heels in until there was solid slope beneath them, and the drop was behind her back, not beneath her feet. She sat up in the snow with the child held to her chest. "I have you," she said. Her voice shook. She had not known it would. "Nothing more will touch you. You're safe now." He gave no answer. He shook against her, his whole small body, teeth going hard, fingers still curled around a sled that was gone. Cold and fright, she thought. And it was. She rubbed his back with the flat of her hand, firm and quick, the way you bring life into a new lamb, and opened her coat and drew him inside it, against the warmth of her. When his breathing had steadied a little, she asked him his name. He lifted his face and looked at her. His eyes were dark and clear and far older than the rest of him. His lips parted. He shaped a word. No sound came with it. He tried again. Again, nothing came. And a fear crossed his face that had nothing to do with the hill. He could not speak. She thought at first that the fright had stolen his voice, the way fright will, and did not press him. "Never mind it," she said gently. "You needn't say anything at all. You've only to breathe and let me carry you." He pushed his face into the hollow of her shoulder. He smelled of cold and wet wool, and under it of something no cottage child had any business smelling of, clean and resinous, like cedar wood, like a chest packed with care in a warm, distant room. The coat beneath her hand was no cottage coat either. The wool was fine and close woven, and the buttons under her fingers were not horn or bone. They were metal, worked and cold. She did not turn it over just then. That would come later. She only held him and looked back at the crooked pine that had held the two of them out of the air and got her breath. She stood with the boy in her arms, heavier than his size, the way frightened children are. She swayed and steadied. She left the slates where they lay and turned her back on the scarp and the crooked pine and the place where the sled had gone over, and carried him down the sheltered side of the hill toward the only warm door she had. Her father's. Her mother rose from the hearth when the latch lifted, took one look at them, and pressed her hand to her mouth. "Him, not me," Neve said. "Build the fire up. Blankets, everyone in the house." Her mother did not look strong, but she moved fast when it came to it. She swung the kettle over the flame and peeled the snow-soaked coat off the boy, and Neve wrapped him in wool, set him on the settle by the fire, and chafed his cold hands between her own. His color came back by slow degrees, gray giving way to something living. His shivering loosened. He watched the flames. He watched Neve. He did not speak. The door opened again, and her father came in from the woodyard, snow on his shoulders, the axe still in his fist. He stopped short at the sight of the child and looked at the small shape in the good wool by the fire. He looked at his daughter, kneeling there in her torn coat, with one shoulder held wrong and a graze dark at her temple. "Whose boy is this?" he said. "I don't know," said Neve. Her father set the axe by the door. He came to the hearth and lifted the wet coat from where it steamed over the chair back and turned it in his hands. The fine, close wool, the worked and shining buttons. Something in the way the breath went out of him made Neve raise her head. "What is it?" she said. Her father did not answer at once. He had folded the collar back, and he was looking at the inside of it, where something had been stitched into the lining in thread darker than the cloth. Neve rose and came to see. It was small and neat and unmistakable. A falcon, wings folded, stooping headfirst. And above the bird, a crown with a break in its rim, one point fallen and gone. Her father's face had turned the color of tallow. "That's the falcon of Draymore," he said, low. "That's the Duke's own mark, his seal, his house." The room went very still. The fire ticked in the grate. On the settle, the boys sat wrapped in their thin blankets, warm now, watching the two of them out of his dark and wordless eyes. And he was the son of the house of Draymore, and Neve knelt on the packed earth of her father's floor in her torn coat, with her shoulder bleeding, and understood, by slow and terrible degrees, whose child she had pulled out of the air. The Duke of Draymore. She had never met the man. That was the truth of it. She had never once stood in a single room with him. But 6 months passed. A letter had come to this house under his seal, and she had refused it. That night, Neve sat up by the fire while the household slept, and she watched the strange boy breathe, and she remembered the letter. It had come in the summer, 6 months gone, on a day when the woodlot smelled of cut pine, and her father was 3 months behind on the loan against it. A man in Draymore livery had brought it to the door on a good horse. It was folded in heavy paper and closed with a seal she had not known then. A falcon, a broken crown. Her father had opened it with hands that were not quite steady. The Duke of Draymore had lost his wife some years before. The Duke of Draymore had a young son, and no wife to raise him, and a great house that wanted a mistress. He did not, the letter said plainly, write in the expectation of affection. He wrote to propose an arrangement that would answer for them both. Her name had been put to him by a lady of the county who thought her sensible and well-made and clever beyond her station. In exchange for her hand, he would settle a sum upon her family. The sum was named. It was enough to lift the loan off the woodlot and off her father's back for good, and to keep her mother in coal and physic to the end of her days. Her father had read it twice, and then looked at her the way a drowning man looks at a rope. Neve had said no. She had not shouted it. She had not wept. She had said it once, quietly, standing in the very spot on the very floor where the Duke's son now slept. "I will not be bought to warm a house I have never seen," she had said, "by a man who sets a wife among the things his estate requires, somewhere between the roof and the drains." Her father had argued. Her father had pleaded, and then, when pleading failed, had shouted. About the loan, about her mother's chest, about what right a girl of 17 had to throw away the one good fortune the family would ever be offered. Her mother had said nothing at all, which was worse. Neve had gone up to the loft and shut the little door and stayed there a day and a night. And in the dark, she had thought, as she thought now, of Linnet. Linnet was her sister, 4 years the elder, with a voice that could stop men in the lane when she sang over the washing. 3 years ago, Linnet had married a corn factor from Everton for the good of the family, because he was prosperous and steady, and had asked. He was not a cruel man. That was the thing Neve could never make anyone understand. He did her no unkindness at all. He kept her in a good house with a girl to help her, and he was proud of her, the way a man is proud of a well-matched team. And Linnet had stopped singing. Neve had watched it happen across 3 years of visits, the letters growing shorter, the laugh coming slower, the light going out of her sister an inch at a time, until the last time Neve saw her, Linnet had smiled at her across a fine table, and there had been no one behind the smile at all. She was not dead. It would almost have been easier to bear if she had been dead. She was simply gone, and still sitting there. That was the thing Neve would not sign her name to, not the poverty of the great houses, the silence of them. She would rather be cold in a small room where a person knew her then warm in a large one where no one did. So her father had written the refusal in his careful hand, and no more had been said of it, and the loan had gone on growing, and that had been the end of the Duke of Draymore. Now his son slept 3 feet from her, wrapped in her mother's mending. She had already sent word to the hall by the pig boy who would run anywhere for a heel of bread, a short note, unsigned. Your son is safe. He is warm and sleeping at the woodcutter's cottage below Skelder. Send in the morning. She had not put her name to it. She did not want her name in that house. She had learned, the summer before, exactly what her name was worth in the ledgers of Draymore, and she had no wish to be thanked, as a sound investment come good at last. She banked the fire. She watched the boy. Somewhere out in the dark, up the white miles toward the great house, a father must be past sleeping with fear, and she was sorry for that, whoever he was. But she thought, she was almost certain, that in the morning she would give the child up to a servant and take her thanks, or her coins, or her nothing, and never once have to stand in a room with the man himself. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about a great many things that winter, but she did not know it yet. The carriage came a little after dawn. Neve heard it before she saw it. Horses coming fast on the packed snow of the lane, more than 2 of them, and wheels behind. She had not slept. She rose stiffly and went to the small window and rubbed the frost from it with the heel of her hand. The carriage was black and bore no arms on its door, but the 4 horses were matched grays with silver at the buckles, and the man on the box wore a caped coat no woodcutter ever owned. It came into the yard and stopped, the horses blowing great plumes into the cold, and the door opened before anyone could climb down to it. A man stepped out. The first thing was his height. He came up out of the low carriage and kept coming, to a height that made the matched grays look like ponies. His coat was black, his dark head bare, and his face, even across the yard, even through the poor glass, was hard, not cruel. Hard the way the beck was hard now beneath its lid of ice, a still surface with the whole cold weight of something moving underneath it, out of sight. He looked at the mean little house and at the door, and came toward it without hurrying. And the not hurrying was the most frightening thing about him, for Neve understood at once that here was a man holding something very tightly, and that the stillness was costing him. Your papa is here, she said quietly, though she did not know why. The boy had come to the window at her side, wrapped in the blanket, and when he saw the tall man crossing the yard, his whole small body went rigid, and his mouth opened, and again, no sound came. Her father opened the door. The Duke did not bow. Dukes do not bow at woodcutters' doors, but he inclined his head a bare inch, more than his rank required, and more than her father had any notion what to do with, and stepped inside without being asked, and the room that had held 4 people all Neve's life became at once too small to breathe in. His eyes went round the room, quick, and found the child. Piers, he said. That was how Neve learned the boy's name, not from the boy, who could not give it, but from the father, who said it like a word he had held in his mouth for 2 days, afraid to let out. The boy pulled free of the blanket and of Neve's hand and crossed the floor, and the Duke went down on one knee on the packed earth in his fine black coat and caught the child against him, and for a moment neither of them moved at all. His eyes were shut. His hand lay spread flat between the boy's thin shoulders, holding him as though the room itself might try to take him back. Neve saw his jaw work. She saw the long, unsteady breath go out of him, the breath of a man who has not let himself breathe properly in a night and a day. She looked away. It seemed to her a thing she had no right to watch. The boy did not speak even now. He pushed his face into his father's collar and shook, and the Duke held him and said nothing either. But Neve saw the hard hand come up to cradle the small head, and saw that the man was not surprised by the silence. He had expected it. He asked the child no questions at all, because he already knew the child would not answer. When at last he stood, he kept a hand on the boy's shoulder, turned, and looked at Neve for the first time. His eyes were gray, the flat, colorless gray the sky had worn the day before over the snow, the gray that tells you nothing and lets you see nothing coming. They rested on her torn coat, on the shoulder she held wrong, on the graze at her temple. She felt the weight of the look of a man who saw a great deal and said little of it. "You are the one," he said. It wasn't a question. "Neve found him on Skelder," her father put in, too quick, too eager, the loan and the ledger already back in his voice. "She went in after him, Your Grace, off the top of the scarp near enough, caught him at the old pine." I asked the girl. The Duke did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Her father stopped as though a door had shut. The Duke looked at Neve and waited. "He was on a sled," she said. "It ran away with him down the long slope. I took him off it before the edge. He is not hurt, cold and full of fright, but not hurt. He should be kept warm today and not made to talk." Something crossed the Duke's face at that. "No," he said. "He will not be made to talk." And then, lower, "You could not have known he would not." Known what? But he did not answer. He was looking at her, and she watched the moment come. She saw it arrive in the gray eyes the way you see a cloud shadow cross a field. He had heard her father say her name, and he was turning it over now, and he was not a man to leave a thing half finished. "Your name," he said. "Your family name." Her father, poor man, gave it before she could. "Aldous, Your Grace. We are the Aldous family, of the Skelder woodlot. We—" The Duke went still. It was a smaller stillness than the one at the fire, when he had held his son, but Neve was watching for it now, and she saw it, saw the name land, saw him set it against another day and another paper, and arrive at the whole truth of who stood before him. Boots wet through, hair down, his living son's handprint still warm on her sleeve. "Aldous," he said, as if to be sure of it. "The woodcutter's daughter of Skelder, who was written to in the summer, and who sent back no." "I did not send anything back," Neve said, her voice steady, which surprised her. "My father wrote the letter, but the no was mine." The room was very quiet. Out in the yard, a horse stamped and blew. "I see," said the Duke of Draymore. He did not apologize, and she had not looked for it. But neither did he thank her, and she understood that too, dimly. Thanks from him would be a large thing, not to be spent before an audience. "You are hurt," he said instead. "It is nothing. Your shoulder is held wrong, and your temple is cut. It is not nothing." He turned his head a fraction. "See that she has whatever she needs," he said to the room, and Neve's mother, frozen in the inner doorway with her apron twisted to a rope, startled and bobbed and fled toward the water and the cloths as though the words had cut a cord. "I want nothing from Draymore," Neve said. She had not meant to say it. It was out of her before she could weigh it, and once out, she would not call it back. The Duke looked at her, and there was something new in the gray, not anger. Something nearer to attention, as though she had done an unlooked-for thing. "No," he said slowly. "I don't imagine you do." He reached into his coat. "But there is the matter of what is owed. You have given me back the one thing I—" He stopped and did not finish it. He drew out a folded note of money, more than her father cleared from the woodlot in 2 whole years, and held it out across the little room. Neve looked at it. She did not take it. "Put your hand down, Your Grace," she said quietly. "I did not pull your boy off that hill for a price. Had I wanted your money, I would have taken it in the summer, when it came with a ring on it, and been warm the rest of my life. I said no to it then. I'll not sell you the same, no the cheaper, now that it is your son at stake, and not your house." Behind her, she heard her father make a small sound, as of a man watching his last hope step off a roof. She did not turn round. The Duke stood with the money in his outstretched hand, and for a long moment did not move. Then slowly he folded it again and put it away, and something in the hard face had shifted, opened by the smallest degree, the way the river ice opens with a sound like a shot when the first thaw reaches it. "No," he said. "I don't suppose you will." That was the moment it might have ended. He had his son. She had her pride. He might have carried the boy out to the gray horses and driven back the white miles to Draymore, and Neve might have watched the carriage out of sight and gone on with her life, cold and free and unbought, exactly as she had meant to. It was Piers who would not let it end. When the Duke bent to lift him, the boy, who had gone to his father so gladly, twisted round and reached back across the room, both arms straining, his face breaking into a silent howl worse than any noise, toward Neve. He caught a fistful of her torn sleeve and held it, and would not, could not, let go. The Duke straightened with the child half in his arms and looked down at the small hand knotted in the woodcutter's daughter's sleeve. Neve saw him understand something. She did not know what. She saw the ledger and the calculation go out of his face, and something harder to name come into it. "He has not reached for anyone," the Duke said, very low, almost to himself, "in 2 years." Then he looked up, and for one moment, the pride and the gray distance were gone out of him, and what was left was only a father in a poor man's kitchen, asking for a thing he did not know how to ask for. "Miss Aldous," he said, "it seems I must beg a favor of you after all." She did not answer at once, aware of the boy's hand fisted in her sleeve, of its small, desperate strength, of her father behind her, of the whole weight of the summer's letter hanging in the room between herself and the tall man who had written it. "What favor?" she said. "Come to the hall. Not for long. A day. 2 days." He said it plainly, as she had said her no, as though he too had learned that a hard thing is best, said undressed. He has not been well since his mother. He does not speak. He goes to no one. His nurse he tolerates. His tutor he sits beside like a stone. And he has just now reached across a room for you, as though you were the last dry ground in a flood. I need not understand it to see it. Something in him has settled on you, and I have spent 2 years watching for anything at all to turn him back toward the living. I am not too proud, not nearly so proud as I had believed, to stand in your father's house and ask you to let it." The fire ticked. The boy's hand tightened on her sleeve. Neve looked down at Piers. He looked up at her out of his dark, wordless, ancient eyes, and he did not beg, because he could not. And somehow that was worse than any begging. 2 days, she said. For the boy. Not for you, and not for Draymore. For the boy, the Duke agreed. I would not dare ask it for myself. And so Neve Aldous, who had sworn she would never stand in a room with the Duke of Draymore, climbed into his black carriage that white morning and was carried up the long miles to his great cold house. His silent son asleep against her side, the man himself across from her, saying nothing, watching the snow, giving nothing away. Draymore Hall was the largest thing Neve had ever stood inside, and the coldest, and not because of the weather. It was a gray stone house the size of a village, set above its own frozen lake, with more windows than all of Wenlock, and a hall you might have driven a hay wain through. Its fires seemed to warm only the air just before them. The rooms ran on, past the light into a dimness that smelled of stone and old smoke and beeswax. The servants moved through it without sound. No one laughed in it. Neve had thought, before she came, that she knew what a great house was. She had known only the idea of one. The truth was quieter and sadder than she had guessed, and within an hour she understood, without a word said, exactly what had happened to the small boy who lived here, and why he had stopped speaking. A child could go silent in a house like this, from nothing more than never being answered. The 2 days she had promised became 3, because on the morning of the 3rd, the boy would not eat unless she sat beside him, and the Duke, told of it by a frightened nurse, sent word to ask, not to command, whether she might stay one more night. She stayed. She told herself it was for Piers, and it was. The boy did not speak in those days, but he changed in small ways that she thought only she, and perhaps his father, could see. He brought her things, a carved horse, a book of pictures, a bird's skull from his pocket, and set them in her lap without a word, watching her face to learn what she made of them. He fell asleep against her arm in the afternoons. Once, while she read to him in the voices she used for the Fen children, the corner of his mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was the ghost of the country a smile comes from. She saw it, and had to look hard at the page before she could go on. She learned the shape of it from the nurse, in pieces. The Duchess, the boy's mother, had died 2 winters back, of a fever in a week. Piers had been 5. He had talked until then like any child. Too much, the nurse said, her eyes filling. And then his mother had died in the great bed upstairs while he slept, and no one had thought how to tell him gently, and he had heard it instead from a housemaid on the stair. And from that hour he had not said one word. Not one in 2 years. Doctors had come and found nothing amiss with throat or tongue. There was nothing in him to mend. He had simply decided the world was not a place he would speak to, and the world, being a great cold house full of soft-footed servants, had let him be. On the 3rd evening, the Duke asked her to come to the library. He was standing by the fire when she came in, a book closed on one finger, as though he had been pretending to read and given up the pretense at the sound of the door. The room was lined floor to ceiling with books. She had never seen so many at once. He caught her looking. "You may borrow any of them," he said. "That is not why I asked you here. But you may." "Thank you." She stayed just inside the door. She did not sit. "Please." He gestured to a chair, and she took it, and he took the one across from it, set the book aside, and for a while did not speak. She was learning this was his way, that he could sit inside a silence without hurrying to fill it, which she had not looked for in a duke. She had grown up in a quiet house. She could outwait most men. "I wrote you a letter in the summer," he said at last. "You will remember it." "I remember it." "I wrote it cold, and deliberately so. I had been told you were a sensible girl, and I believed I was paying you the compliment of plain dealing, that I would not insult you by counterfeiting a warmth I did not feel for a woman I had never met." He turned the ring on his smallest finger and stopped. "I have thought a great deal, since yesterday, about the kind of man who writes such a letter. I had set it down as honesty. It wasn't honesty, it was only cold. There is a difference between naming a thing plainly and feeling nothing for it, and I confused the one for the other. I wrote to a living woman as though she were a repair wanted about the house, between the roof and the drains, as you had it. You had the words exactly right. They have been in my ear since." Neve said nothing. She had not looked for any of this. When your father's letter came back with your refusal, I was not angry. Whatever I may have let you believe in your kitchen. If you want the truth of it, I was ashamed. You had seen the letter for precisely what it was, and answered it precisely as it deserved, and there was more honor in your refusing than I had put into the asking. He looked at her directly. You were right to refuse me. I have wanted to tell you so since the hour I learned your name. That is the first thing I asked you here to say. The fire cracked. Far off in the great house a door closed, and the sound reached them thinned by all the distance between. I did not know, Neve said finally, low, that you had felt any of that. I thought I had been an inconvenience you had crossed out of a book. No, he said. You were the first true thing anyone had said to me in a long time. He let that stand a moment. Then he set his hands on his knees, looked down at them, and said the second thing. And this one plainly cost him more than the first. I will not offer you anything. I gave my word once in that letter, and kept poor faith with the spirit of it, and I'll not break faith twice. I am not asking you to reconsider what you refused. You refused it rightly, and it is gone, and I know it. He looked up. But I find I would like to write to you, not as the Duke of Draymore, as the man who sat across this fire and heard you say plainly what you would not sell, and who has not heard anyone speak so plainly, to his face, in longer than he can remember. Letters, and nothing owed upon them. Read them or burn them as you please. If one is answered, another will come. If none is answered, none will come again, and I will carry no grievance out of it. And Piers will be cared for, whatever you decide. I would not hang the boy's welfare on your pen. He stopped. I am asking for myself. It is the first thing I have asked for myself in a long while. You may say no. You have said it to me before and lived, and so have I. Nave looked at him, at the hard gray face that was not, she saw now, hard the whole way down. At the man who had knelt on her father's earthen floor and come to the end of his pride to ask a woodcutter's daughter to help his son. Letters, she said. Letters. I may answer or not. You may do exactly as you please. That is rather the whole of what I am offering. It is not much from a duke. It is a great deal from me. She was quiet a moment. Then, because she had long ago promised herself always to say the true thing, she said it. Then write to me, she said, and I will see whether I answer. The first letter reached her 4 days after she came home from the hall. It came by a boy on a pony, and her mother took it in with both hands as though it might break, and turned it over twice to look at the falcon in the wax before she gave it up. It was short. It said that the boy had taken to setting his carved horse on the sill of the west window each morning, the window that looked down the valley toward Wenlock, and that no one had told him to, and that the Duke did not know what to make of it, but thought she might like to. It said nothing else. It was signed only with his name, Corin, no title, as though he had left the Duke of Draymore standing outside the door of the letter. Neve read it by the fire. Then she read it again. Then she put it in her apron pocket and went about the evening, and took it out once more before she slept. She wrote back that same night, though she had told herself she would take a week. She wrote that a horse set facing home was not a small thing, but a very large one. That her father's old dog, when Linnet had married and gone to Averton, had lain 3 weeks at the gate with its nose pointed down the road, and would not be moved. That grief in the young and the speechless keeps its own watch, and that if Piers had chosen a window to keep it from, then someone he was waiting for had better, now and then, appear in it. She did not say who. She sealed the letter before she could think better of the last line. His answer came in 3 days. Hers went back in 2. After that, the letters kept their own weather. coming twice in some weeks and once in others, and Neve stopped pretending, to herself at least, that it ever took her a week to answer them. They were not love letters. Neither of them would have known how to begin one, and each would have been embarrassed for the other for trying. They wrote about small things. He wrote of a book he was reading and thought poorly of a tenant's quarrel over a boundary hedge, of the ice on the Great Lake, thick enough now to bear a cart, and how Piers had stood at its edge a whole hour watching the men cut blocks of it, and had not once let go of the old hound's collar. She wrote of the Fen children and their letters, of her mother's chilblains, of a lame ewe her father was nursing in the lean-to that had taken to following her about the yard like a dog. Money she never mentioned, and neither did he. That door had been shut in her father's kitchen, and by unspoken agreement, it stayed shut. It was in one of those weeks that Neve understood the wood wasn't only theirs. Back before the worst of the winter, before ever she had carried a strange boy down off Skelder, she had come out one gray morning to find a stack of split logs against the cottage wall by the door. Good dry beech, a week's burning at the least, that had not been there at dusk. Her father had cut and sold every stick they owned that month. There was no wood of theirs it could have been. No one had knocked. No one in Wenlock had that to spare. She had thought it a wonder and a mercy, and let it lie. But now, asking in the village, she found she had not been the only one. Old Mother Sennet, whose man was dead, had found a sack of meal and a side of bacon on her step, and no word with it. And the Pettit widow the same, and a family down the beck whose roof tree had cracked. All that winter, in the dark, someone had been going about leaving warmth at the doors of people who could not pay for it, and taking great care that he should never be caught at it. The village had a dozen guesses, and not a shred of proof of any. Neve thought it a strange and a good thing, and wrote of it up to the hall, half as a wonder and half as a question. He did not answer that part of the letter. He wrote back about the ice, and the book, and the boy, and said nothing at all about the wood. She noticed the silence. She set it aside. She did not yet know how to read it. She saw him twice more before the year turned, both times going up for the boy, for Piers, who ate now when she sat by him, who had begun to bring her not only things, but drawings, small, careful drawings of horses and dogs, and once 3 figures standing on a hill, which she did not let herself study too long. And both times the Duke was there at the edge of it, never intruding, watching his son, and, she came to understand, watching her. And both times he walked her himself down to the carriage when the light failed, and kept a careful, proper distance the whole way, and closed the door with his own hand, and stood bareheaded in the cold until the wheels took the turn of the drive. And each time, riding home through the blue snow, something shifted low in Neve's chest. Some warmth she would not weigh or measure, because to weigh it would be to own that she had begun to want a thing she had sworn herself off, that she had become, in spite of herself, a woman keeping watch at a window, like a small boy with a wooden horse, for a man who had told her to her face that he would never ask again. He had told her so. She held to that. He was a duke, and she was a woodcutter's daughter, who had refused him once to his face. What they had was letters, and a healing child, and an honesty neither of them had found anywhere else in the world. And that, she told herself, was all it could ever be, and more than most people were given, and enough. She almost believed it. Then, in the 2nd week of March, the Dowager Duchess came to Draymore. The Dowager Duchess of Draymore was the Duke's mother, and she came 4 times a year to set the house to rights, and she had views. Neve knew of her arrival the way she knew most things at the hall, from Piers, who could not tell her, and so showed her, by going stiff and small and quiet again the morning the great traveling coach came up the drive, as though a colder season had come into the house ahead of the weather. Neve was there that week. She had come up to sit with the boy through a fever, and the fever had broken, and she had stayed the extra day. And so, she was in the schoolroom with Piers on her knee when the note was brought. It was not from the Duke. It was written in a hand, like frost on a pane, all fine sharp points, and it didn't ask. The Dowager Duchess will take tea with Miss Aldous at 4 o'clock in the south parlor. That was the whole of it. Neve read it twice. She smoothed the boy's hair and set him down among his drawings, and told the waiting footman that she would come. Lady Ottoline was tall and thin and very upright, with the Duke's grey eyes set in a face that had none of his stillness. Where his gaze rested, hers cut. She wore grey silk that had cost more than the oldest woodlot cleared in 3 years, and she did not rise when Neve came in, and she did not ask her to sit. And Neve, who had learned a thing or two about power in cold rooms, sat anyway, unbidden, in the chair across from her, and folded her scarred hands in her lap, and waited. The Dowager let the silence run, the way her son did, but where his silences made room, hers were built to shrink you. Neve had grown up in a house too poor to waste words. She could be silent as long as any duchess breathing. So, Lady Ottoline said at last, "You are the girl who fished my grandson out of the snow." "I am. And who refused my son a marriage the summer before it. I am that girl as well." The Dowager's mouth moved. It was not a smile. "You are aware, I imagine, that you are the single subject of conversation in 3 parishes. The woodcutter's daughter, who said no to a duke, and then plucked his heir off a cliff, and now sits in his schoolroom with his child on her knee, and takes his letters twice a week." She let each item drop like a coin onto a table. "You did not know they were counted. They are counted, Miss Aldous. Everything in a house like this is counted. By someone." "I did not write to be talked of," Neve said. "No, I don't suppose you did. Girls of your sort seldom intend the harm they do." Lady Ottoline set down her cup. "Let me be plain with you, because you strike me as a young woman who prefers plainness, and because I have not the patience, at my age, for any gentler kind of cruelty. My son is grieving still, whatever he tells himself. A grieving man is a foolish one, and a foolish man in a great house reaches for whatever has lately made him feel warm, and does not stop to reckon what it will cost the house, or the child, or the name that is not his alone to spend. You have made him feel warm. I do not doubt that it is real. I doubt only that it is wise." Neve said nothing. Lady Ottoline studied her over the rim of the cup and went on, unhurried. "You imagine, I dare say, that because he writes to you of books and birds and the ice on the lake, he sees you clearly. He does not. He sees a window that has let a little light into a house that has had none in 2 years. When the spring comes and light is everywhere and cheap, he will wonder what he ever wanted with the one small pane of it. Men are not constant, Miss Aldous, whatever the ballad sheets tell you. My son, least of all, and I should know, for I raised him. He buried a wife he had married for love, and it very nearly finished him, and he will not hazard that a second time. He told me as much himself, this week, in this very room. And when he wearies of you, for he will be too proud and too kind to say so outright. He will simply write to you less, and then not at all, and leave you to reason out for yourself what has happened, as women of your station always must." Neve said nothing to that either. She did not know whether it was true. She thought that it might be, and the not knowing was the sharpest thing the Dowager had yet said, because it was the one thing she could not meet with pride. She leaned forward a very little. "That child on your knee will one day be the Duke of Draymore. He will sit in the Lords. he will marry an earl's daughter of his own, and to do it, he must be raised, knowing what he is. What he is learning instead, this winter, is to fret at a window until a woodcutter's girl appears in it. You are teaching my grandson to need you, Miss Aldous, and you cannot be what he will need. When my son comes back to his senses, and he will, they always do, you will be sent down the hill with a purse and a good character, and the boy will lose you as he lost his mother, in a week, without warning, and he will go silent for good, and this time, nothing will bring him back. Is that your kindness? Is that what the saving of him was for? The fire spat. Neve felt the words go in exactly where they had been aimed, because they were not wholly false, and the dowager was clever enough to have salted the lie with just enough truth to carry it. She sat still until she trusted her own voice. "May I ask you something, Your Grace?" "You may not, but you will, regardless. Ask it." "When you came into this house as a bride," Neve said, low and even, "did anyone in it answer you when you spoke? In all your years as its mistress, did one soul in these rooms ever hear you as a person, and not as the Duchess of Draymore? Because I have been under this roof 4 days at a stretch, and I have watched a small boy stop speaking inside it, and I do not think he stopped for want of an earl's daughter to raise him. I think he stopped because there was no one in all this gray stone who would answer him. And I think you know, better than anyone alive, the difference between a house that is run and a house that is heard, because I think you have lived on the wrong side of it your whole life. That is why you are so certain that warmth is folly, Your Grace. You were never once allowed to afford it." The Dowager Duchess of Draymore went white, and then very still, and her hand on the arm of her chair closed until her own rings bit her fingers. For a long moment she did not speak, and in that moment, Neve saw that she had struck something true, and took no joy in it, for it was a wound older than either of them. "You forget yourself," Lady Ottoline said at last, and the edge had gone out of her voice and left something colder underneath. "You will not speak to me so." "No," Neve agreed, and rose. "I don't imagine I shall have the chance again. I'll not be much in rooms with you. I did not pull Piers off that hill to make him a duke, or to make myself one. I did it because he was going over the edge, and I had 2 hands. What comes after belongs to his father, and to him, and to me. Not to you. Thank you for the tea, Your Grace. I did not touch it, but I thank you for it." She was at the door when Lady Ottoline's voice followed her, low and quite certain. "You will regret this conversation, girl." "I have regretted a great many things, Your Grace," Neve said without turning round. "I don't expect this will come to be one of them." And she walked out. Her legs shook the whole length of the long corridor, and she did not let it show. The footman who opened the great door for her would not meet her eyes. Servants hear everything in a house like this. The Dowager had said so herself. And Neve went out into the cold, with her chin level, and her scarred hand steady, and her heart going like a hair under her ribs. Riding down the white hill, for what she believed might be the last time, she was certain of only one thing, that the Dowager would go to her son that very night and say her piece, and that the next move in it was not Neve's to make. She had spoken her truth, and kept her dignity, and very likely lost the one warm thing the winter had given her, all in the same quarter of an hour. She did not yet know whether she had been brave or only proud. She was not certain even now that there was any difference between the two. She was right that the Dowager would go to her son. She was wrong about very nearly everything else. She never learned what passed between the two of them that night, or in the days that followed. No one told her. She pieced at it for years and never had it whole. She knew only what she could count, and what she could count was the letters. And after that afternoon in the south parlor, the letters stopped. 2 days. Nothing. She told herself 2 days was nothing, that they had come slower than that before. 4 days. Nothing. A week. She caught herself listening for the beat of a pony's hooves on the lane the way. She thought, with a hot flush of shame, a certain small boy listened at a certain window, and she was ashamed of the likeness, and could not help it. 10 days. No falcon in the wax. No word in that plain, careful hand. Nothing at all. Her mother watched her across those days, and said nothing, which was her mother's way. But once, passing, she set a hand on Neve's shoulder and left it there a moment. And that was worse than any question could have been. Her father did not understand it at all. He knew only that the letters, which had frightened and thrilled him in equal measure, had ceased, and he went about the yard with the look of a man watching a door he had counted on quietly close. On the 11th day she walked up to Skelder. She did not altogether know why. There was no errand at the top of the hill, and no child to teach that way. There was nothing up there but the wind, and the long white slope, and the crooked pine at the edge of the scarp. But her feet took her there, the way feet will when the rest of you is working hard at not thinking, and she climbed to the top and stood by the pine that had held her and the boy out of the empty air on the afternoon that began all of it, and she looked down the drop at the frozen beck, and the whole world gone hard and gray and soundless, and she was soundless with it. She had done right. She was nearly sure of that. She had stood in a cold room and refused to be made small, refused to be warned off a man as though she were a poacher off a lord's ground. And she had told an old and unhappy woman a truth it had taken her 30 years not to hear. She would do every word of it again, and it had cost her all the winter had quietly handed her, and the two things sat together in her, the being right and the losing, and would not settle into any single feeling she could put a name to. She laid her bare hand on the bark of the pine, on the place where it had torn her palm months before, and felt the old healed scar wake to the cold, and she thought that this, perhaps, was what the rest of her life would be, cold and free and unbought and right and alone. She had chosen it. She had chosen it twice now. She did not weep. It was not that kind of grief. She stood by the pine until the light went blue and the cold came up out of the ground and through the soles of her boots, and then she turned for home. And that was when she saw, at the foot of the hill, where the road climbed up out of the black trees, a single horseman on a tall gray horse, sitting quite still in the dusk, watching her. She went down the hill toward him, because there was nothing else to be done. The only other course was to stand at the top of the scarp and wait, and she had done enough waiting that winter to last her a life. He swung down from the gray as she came, and looped the rein over a low branch, and stood beside the horse, and let her close the last of the distance herself. He was not dressed for calling. His riding coat was mud to the knee, his dark hair was wild from the road, and his face, when she was near enough to read it, was the face of a man who had not slept properly in nights. The Duke of Draymore, who missed nothing and gave nothing away, looked as though he had been turned out in the weather inside out. "Miss Aldous," he said, "Your Grace." They stood. The gray horse pulled at the frozen grass, found nothing in it, blew and gave up. "My mother," he said, "told me what she said to you. She was proud of it. She believed I would thank her." A muscle shifted in his jaw. "I have not written to you these 11 days because I did not trust what I would put on the paper. I gave you my word, at the hall, that I would not offer for you again. I have kept it. I meant to go on keeping it. and I found I could not sit down and write you 3 careful pages about a book, or the ice, or the boy, and pretend my mother had not tried to drive you off my land like a stray dog, and that I had not wanted, when I heard of it, to—" He stopped himself. He was a careful man even then. Every letter I began was the wrong letter. Each one said the thing I had promised you I would not say. So I sent none. That was the silence. It was not what you will have thought it was. Neve's heart was going hard against her ribs. She held her hands still at her sides. "Then why have you come," she said, "if not to say it?" "To tell you that I will not." He said it steadily, holding her eyes. "I gave you my word, and I keep my word. It is very nearly the only thing I own that I did not inherit. I am not here to offer you anything, Neve. I am here to tell you that I have weighed every word my mother said, and that she is right in part. Right that the country will call it a scandal. Right that a duchess lifted from a woodlot will be shown no mercy. Right that there are duties in the thing that will fall cruelly hard on a woman not bred to them. She is right about all of that. And she is wrong about the one part that signifies, and I rode down this hill to tell you which part, and then to leave you your peace, because I will not break my word by asking again. That is the whole of what I came for." "Which part?" Neve said. Her voice was not quite level now. "That you are only a warmth a grieving fool reached for in the dark. You are not that. You are the first person in 2 years to tell me the truth, to my face, and not flinch from it. And my son reached across a room for you when he had reached for no one at all since his mother went into the ground. And neither of those is a thing a foolish man invents. She is wrong about you. That is what I came to say." He inclined his head, that bare, stiff inch. "I have said it. I will not trouble you further." And he turned to the horse. He was going to leave. He was actually going to leave. The maddening, honorable, wooden-headed man was going to keep his word and ride back up the hill and leave the whole of it hanging unfinished in the freezing air because he had once promised her that he would. "Wait," Neve said. He stopped, his hand on the rein. She found that her breath had gone short, and her eyes were stinging in the wind, and that she did not, for once in the whole of her life, care in the smallest degree what it might cost her to say a true thing out loud. "When I refused you in the summer," she said, "I told myself I was refusing your rank, your money, the great cold house, and the Earl's daughters, and all of it. That is what I said to my father, and to myself, and I believed it." She swallowed. "It was not the truth. I was never afraid of your rank. I was afraid of your silence. I have a sister who married up, and safe, and warm, and the light went out of her, a winter at a time, in a fine house, with a kind enough husband who never once heard a word she said. And I swore I would sooner be cold, and poor, and known than warm, and rich, and unheard in a great room. I thought a duke's wife was the second of those. That is why I said no. I was refusing the quiet, your grace. I only mistook it, that summer, for you." The wind moved in the pine above them. The one crow that lived on the hill said its single hard word, and was still. "And now," he said, very low, "and now I have read every letter you sent me, until the folds went soft as cloth, and stood at a window I told myself I did not stand at, and climbed a frozen hill today, because a week without your hand on a page felt like a house with the fire gone out of it. You are not the silence I was afraid of. You are the opposite of it. I have known that some weeks now, and been too proud and too well bound by your own promise to say it." He came one step nearer. He stopped himself. He did not close the last of the ground between them. You told me, he said carefully, that I was not to ask. I did. You hold me to my word in all things. I do. Then release me from it, he said, or we shall stand on this hill until full dark, two people keeping a promise that neither of us once kept. Neve laughed, a broken, astonished little sound she had not known was in her, and the tears went over at last, and she let them. I release you, she said. Ask. And the Duke of Draymore, mud to the knee, bareheaded in the wind at the top of Skelder Hill, his gray horse at his shoulder, and the crooked pine above him, and the whole hard white country falling away below, asked her. I have written you a letter near enough every week since the first snow, he said, and read yours so often the creases have worn to felt. I am done with paper, Neve. I did not come for a woman to keep my house or mother my son, though the house is cold, and the boy has been yours since the day you caught him. I came for the one person who looked me in the face and told me the truth when I had forgotten it had a sound. Marry me, not for your father's debt, which I will lift whether you take me or throw the paper in the fire. Marry me because I would give every letter I shall ever write for the plain daily luck of asking you a thing across a table and being there in the room to hear what you say back. She did not answer at once. She let the moment hold. She looked at him, the hard face wholly undone, the gray eyes waiting, the pride all spent on the frozen grass between them. And she thought of her mother who had wept, and her father who had shouted, and the dowager in her gray silk, and Linnet's smile with no one behind it, and a small, silent boy setting a wooden horse on a sill to face the road home. Yes, she said. He did not sweep her off her feet. He did not catch her up, nor kiss her hard, nor do any of the things the ballad sheets promise. That was not the kind of man he was, and she would not, in the end, have believed it of him if he had. He crossed the last of the ground between them slowly, 3 steps, 4, and stopped close in front of her, and lifted her hand from where it hung at her side. It was her right hand, the one that had caught the pine branch above the scarp and taken the bite of its bark, the hand that worked. He turned it over in both of his. His hands were warm from the rains. Hers was cold to the bone. He looked down at the old white scar across the palm, at the chapped skin and the split knuckle, at the plain, hard-used hand of a girl who had never in her life had a maid to keep it soft. He said nothing. He held it as though it were the finer of the two. Then he bent his dark head and set his mouth to the back of her fingers, once, very lightly, and straightened, and folded her cold hand between both of his warm ones, and kept it there, out of the wind. You have stood up here until you are half ice, he said at last, and his voice was not quite steady either. Let me take you down. I'll come to your father's door tonight, before the light is gone, and say it to him plainly, and to my mother after, which will be the harder telling, and the shorter. She laughed, wet and helpless and unashamed. Yes, she said. He lifted her onto the gray horse and swung up behind her and gathered the reins around her so that she sat within the circle of his arms. And she felt the warmth of him at her back and smelled the cold leather and the smoke and the clean, far-off thing beneath it, and the gray picked its careful way down off the hill toward the trees. Neither of them spoke. She did not need him to. She thought that she had spent the whole of her life keeping quiet because no one would answer, and that she was riding down now into a different kind of quiet altogether. The full kind, the kind two people keep together on purpose, the kind that is not silence at all, but only peace. They were married in the spring, in the small gray church at Wenlock, which had never in its life held so many people. Her mother wept from the first word to the last, and wasn't ashamed. Her father, who had shouted for 2 days in the summer over a fortune refused, stood at the front in his one good coat, could not stop smiling, and shook so many hands his arm ached for a week. Lynette came from Averton, and something in her face as she watched her younger sister marry not up, but toward. Watched Neve wed a man who leaned in to catch each word she said. Shifted. And for the first time in 3 years, Neve saw a little of her true sister look out through her eyes and thought, perhaps not everything the cold takes is lost. Perhaps some of it only waits for the thaw. Piers carried the rings. He would not be a page in silk. He had refused it in his wordless way, going rigid at the first fitting until the notion was given up. But the rings he would carry on a cushion with a face of tremendous solemnity, because Neve had knelt and told him it was the most important task in the church, and that she would trust no one else with it. He did not smile. He understood it to be a duty. He dropped the cushion once on the way up the aisle and picked it up and set the rings back upon it with such grave and careful hands that half the church was in tears before a single vow was spoken. The Dowager Duchess came. She wore iron gray and sat in the second pew, and her face, through the whole of it, gave away precisely nothing. Neve had not been sure she would come. Afterward, at the wedding breakfast in the great hall of Draymore, where the fires had been heaped so high that for once the warmth reached past the hearthstones into the room, Lady Adeline crossed to her with a glass in hand and stood a moment in silence. "I said a great many things to you in the south parlor," she said. "You did," said Neve. "I do not withdraw them. Most were true, and you will find them truer than you yet think in the years ahead." She looked at Neve out of the Duke's own gray eyes, and there was no warmth in them, and no war either, which was new. "But I was wrong in one particular. I told you that you could not be what the boy needs. I have this morning watched him carry a cushion the length of a church without letting go of the whole of himself along the way, which he could not have done at Christmas. It seems I was mistaken. I am seldom mistaken, and I dislike it extremely." She raised her glass the barest inch. "You will do, Duchess. You will do." And she drank, and turned, and went away. And that was as near as Lady Adeline of Draymore came, in all her life, to an embrace. She never grew warm. It was not in her, but when, at a London dinner that first autumn, a viscountess with a carrying voice made a joke about mud on the hem of the new Duchess of Draymore, it was the Dowager who answered her, from the far end of the table, without lifting her voice, in 2 sentences so quiet and so complete that the Viscountess made her excuses before the fish. She never afterward let anyone in her hearing forget whose side she stood on. Neve learned to be grateful for it. There was one thing more Neve came to know that first year, and she came to it by accident, from a stable boy named Wick, 14, and lately much in the Duke's company, who told her, not knowing it for a secret, about the nights. She had asked him idly why the gray gelding had gone lame in February, and Wick had said, without thinking, that it was the night riding that did it, all that winter, in the deep snow with the panniers on. What night riding, Neve had said, and the boy, too far in to stop, had told her. How all that hard winter the Duke had ridden out after dark, alone, but for Wick to hold the horses, with firewood and meal and bacon on a pack pony, to the doors of the poorest tenants and widows across 3 parishes, the ones behind on their rent, whom he had quietly ordered his steward never to press, and left it all in the dark, and ridden away, and forbidden the boy to breathe a word of it to a living soul. He said it weren't charity if folk knew, Wick said, going pale as it dawned on him what he'd done. He said charity as gets thanked is only a man buying himself a good opinion, The whole point were that no one should ever know it were him. Please, your grace, he'll turn me off. He will not, Neve said. He will never know you told me. Say nothing, Wick, and go on. It is safe with me. She stood a long while in the stable yard after the boy had gone. She had wondered all winter who left the wood at the poor doors of the valley, who had stacked the good dry beech at her own father's cottage the week before Christmas, when there was no wood of theirs it could have been. Now she knew. The hard, proud man that all of London believed it knew, the cold duke who had once priced a wife by letter, had spent the worst winter in memory, riding out alone in the dark to keep strangers warm, and taken enormous pains that none of them could ever thank him for it. She did not go to him with it that day. She carried it a while, the way you carry a thing that is almost too large to hold. She said it to him at last, one evening in November, by the fire in the library, with the snow beginning again at the tall black windows and Piers asleep upstairs. Wick told me about the wood, she said. The night rides, all of it. He did not look up from his book. Wick talks too much. You left it at my father's door. I left it at a great many doors. You left it at ours before ever you had stood in a room with me, when I was nothing to you but a name in a ledger and a no on a page. She waited until he looked up. Why did you never tell me? He was quiet a moment. Because it was not a thing for telling, he said. A kindness done to be seen is a wholly different creature from the same kindness done in the dark. You, of anyone, know that. You did not pull my son off a hill for an audience. He closed the book on one finger. Do not make me a good man, Neve. I am only a man who has learned what warmth costs, and would rather not be thanked for spending it. No, she said. It is a far larger thing than you will ever own to. But I'll not thank you for it, since you would hate it. She crossed to him and took his hand, the warm one, that had lifted her cold one on the hill, and held it. I only wanted you to know that I know. He turned his hand and closed it around hers. Then we are square, he said. For I have always known you, from the first morning in your father's kitchen, with your hair down and your chin up, refusing my money. I knew you then. And he went back to his book, but he did not let go her hand, and she sat down beside him, and they watched the fire and the snow, and neither spoke, and the silence was the full kind, the kind she had crossed a whole winter to reach. And then, in the spring, Piers spoke. It was at no grand moment. There was no one by to see it, which afterward seemed to Neve exactly right. The boy who could not bear watching would never have chosen a stage. It was an ordinary bright morning, the ice going off the lake in long, groaning cracks, and Neve was in the garden cutting the first of the daffodils, and Piers came running down the path toward her, the way he had learned to run again that winter, and then stopped, and his small face worked the way it had worked on the hill the day she caught him, the day nothing came. And this time, something came. Neve, he said. One word. Her name, cracked and rusty and small, in a voice no one at Draymore had heard in 3 years. The voice of a boy who had set it down beside his mother's grave, and had only now, at last, in the safe, ordinary morning, dared to pick it up again. She went down on her knees in the wet grass. She did not make a great thing of it, though her heart was breaking and mending in the very same instant, because she understood, better than anyone living, that if she made it enormous, she might frighten him back down into the quiet for good. She only opened her arms, and he ran into them, and she held him and said, I'm here. I heard you. I'm here. He talked after that. Slowly at first, a word, then a sentence, then, by summer, a river of them. The nurse had said he once chattered the day long, And so, in his own time, he did again. Until the great gray house that no one had laughed in was loud from morning to night, with a boy who had 3 years of words saved up and meant to spend every one of them. The Duke would look up from his papers when he heard it, and go still, and listen, as though it were the finest music ever set down, which to him it was. Piers grew, strong and loud and brown in the sun. He rode a fat pony badly, and then well, and one day in his 9th year, running past her into that same garden, he called back over his shoulder, not noticing he had done it, "Coming, Mama?" and was gone through the gate before he could see her face. He never remarked upon it, neither did she. He called her so from that day on, as though he always had. Neve went back to Skelder sometimes, in the years that followed, when she came down the valley to see her mother. She would climb the long slope, green in the summers, gold in the autumns, and stand at the top by the crooked pine at the edge of the scarp, the pine that had held the two of them out of the air on the afternoon that began everything, and lay her scarred palm against its bark. She would think of the runaway sled, the small white face, the last 6 feet of ground, of a cold letter refused, and a warm one that did not come for 11 days, and a proud man who kept his promises and left firewood in the dark. She would think how she had said no to a fortune and yes to a man, and how those 2 answers, that had looked, to everyone who shouted over them, so opposed, had turned out to be the very same yes underneath. Yes to being known. Yes to a house where a word she spoke would be heard and answered, where a child who had gone silent for grief had learned, in his own good time, that it was safe to speak again. For if she had said yes that first summer, to the letter, to the ledger, to the warm and wordless house, she would never have stood here now, with the wind off the scarp in her hair, and a loud, bright boy waiting at the foot of the hill, and a man at home who looked up from his work to listen whenever she came into a room. She would rest her hand on the pine a moment longer. Then she would turn and go down the hill, toward the voices, toward home.